Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Doug Buchanan, the Editor-in-Chief of Columbus Business First and a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Welcome to the annual Lynn, Greer Legacy and Civic Engagement Forum, celebrating inclusion and equity for the LGBTQ community. We are so pleased that you are all with us today. Today's forum is made possible by the Lynn, Greer Legacy and Civic Engagement Fund. Lynn, thank you for your generosity. We are so pleased you're with us today. Please have a round of applause for Lynn Greer. Also, thank you to today's forum sponsors, Battelle and Lighthouse Behavioral Health Solutions, and today's forum partner, Stonewall Columbus. Today's live stream is presented by the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and by the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of today's sponsors with a round of applause. From New York's Stonewall Uprising in 1969 through the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s to the Supreme Court decision that declared same-sex marriage legal in every state, LGBTQ rights have in the U.S. advanced thanks to the tireless work of activists and advocates. Now a growing backlash is taking aim at these rights in the U.S. and threatening to roll back decades of progress in equality. Today we'll look at both the past and the future for the struggle of equality in Central Ohio through the eyes of 4 generations of activists. Please welcome today's speakers. Chris Cozad, LGBTQ activist and owner and president of Alternative Auto Care. Karen Hewitt, the associate director of Leadership Columbus and co-founder of the Ohio Rest Collective. Jose Rodriguez, vice president of Lighthouse Behavioral Health Solutions. And Joseph Soza, the Central Ohio Regional Organizer for Equality Ohio. And our host, Ronald Murray, President of the Stonewall Columbus Board of Trustees and Director of Franklin County Municipal Court's March Program. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyers. Ronald, all yours.
Thank you, Doug. Can you hear me? Thank you, Doug. Thank you all for having us here. Give yourselves a hand of applause. Some energy up. So we only have a short time, and we have a very verbose and excited panel. So we're going to start our first questions. Yeah, they're excited, yeah. So we're going to start off with our introductions, and also how did you start your journey in LGBT advocacy and activism? And I'm going to add to this. I didn't tell you I was going to do this. And tell me your age. So we're going to start with Joseph.
All right, then.
That was not part of the script.
It definitely was. I left that part out in our briefing. Joseph.
Yes. So I just turned 29 years old. I would say my answer to the question of how I got involved, it actually just started with life experience, right? It started with me learning how to practice resistance on my own person, right? I am a gay man, grew up in a multicultural Puerto Rican, Spanish household. Here in Ohio, grew up a pastor's kid in church. And being a gay kid with very, I think, sort of outward-facing kind of feminine energy set me up in growing up in Ohio to experience, right, a lot of homophobia, a lot of femphobia, and a lot of those things that are very common, right, in LGBTQ experience. And so for me, I think it did just kind of start with having to learn how to hold pride in myself and even the small things of resistance, like, yeah, I'm gonna wear my earrings, yeah, I'm gonna be myself, and run against the grain. That's kind of how I got started.
Thank you, Joseph. Jose?
Yeah, so I am Jose Rodriguez, and I started my activism in the early 90s, and I'll be honest, it was out of anger. I came in which my friends were dying and dropping dead like flies. And the rhetoric that I heard, and I still consider myself a survivor of that time because it was such a difficult time. But my friends were dying, and the rhetoric that I was hearing, it's the same rhetoric that I would hear later, decades later, about trans people. And it's the same rhetoric that I would hear about people living with substance use disorder. That we were trash, and it was okay if we died. And that pissed me off. So it was that anger that I needed to find a way of channeling that anger to do something good for it. So whether I did or not, people will judge that. But I think that was the impetus for, and it's still the impetus for my work today. I work at a recovery treatment center, and that is why I work there, because I believe in the mission, and I believe people with SUD, just like us, gay or queer people, deserve to be alive and thrive. So.
Thank you, Jose. Karen?
You want to give your generation?
What's that?
You want to give your generation?
No. I've had work done. Figure it out.
Right.
We'll just say he's at the top of the grid.
That's funny. Karen Hewitt, I use thee, her, and she, her pronouns. And I, too, won't give you my age. If you know me, you'll know. But I'll call myself the pragmatic millennial. Do what you want with that information. So what got me into advocacy, before I knew anything else about any of my identities, I knew I was Black and a girl, and born a girl, raised a girl. I also was in the church, and my father was a minister, and interestingly enough, he was also in HR and worked for the city. So it was an interesting contrast. I didn't get all the messages from him about that. Growing up, I was always a tomboy, played college basketball, so anything that was a bit androgynous could fall under the guise of tomboy and athletic girl. But getting into college and being able to have that space to explore and play basketball and still see the stigmas that were around same-sex relationships or confusing or fluid relationships, that was kind of when it was like, it was on me, and I realized all the ways that I would dim or shrink to be passable in whatever ways I needed to, depending on the environment. And then I went to get my master's, and I had a class in diversity and inclusion, Dr. Beverly Gordon, I'll never forget it, over at the Ohio State University, and it was all about African American education from 1950 to now. And that was when I saw all of the things and realized that there was pretty much a copy and paste formula for Black, Jewish, LGBTQ+, when it came to hate and the things that we were fundamentally supposed to be able to do as citizens, but not, but fighting for those same rights. And so that's where it was like, okay, there needs to be something done, and I had lived experience, so it made sense to be in this space.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, I'll tell you my age. I'm 67. And so I guess I'm probably the top of the chart. I think I'm a little older than Jose. But I, too, grew into activism from early childhood. I was raised by two disabled parents. And because, disability in the 50s was not, there was no ADA in those days, I learned about discrimination from a very early age. We were very poor, working class poor. And so I learned to volunteer because we couldn't give money, but we could give time. And so I learned to volunteer in that context, and that grew. And then when I went away to college, I really discovered the feminist movement and feminism and anti-war activism. And so those were my two kind of, maybe three if you count disability, legs to the stool that led me to where I am. And I did a lot of work in the 70s around violence against women, so anti-violence work became very important to me. How that translated into the LGBT world was through HIV and AIDS, as Jose referenced. I was involved with an organization called Blood Sisters that organized lesbians donating blood during the peak of the AIDS epidemic because gay men couldn't and still can't. And so that was kind of where I stepped into the LGBT community, and I guess the rest is kind of history. I was on Stonewall's board for 12 or 13 years. I was the president for 3 years. I chaired Pride for 10 years, and it kind of went on from there. And I started anti-violence work at Stonewall and took that to Bravo to, here I am now.
Thank you,
Yeah.
So in all of your answers, we talked a lot about activism and advocacy, and sometimes people confuse the two. If they're the same, or what's the difference? So I'll ask you that, Jose. What is activism versus advocacy, and how are they different?
Well, the good news is that they're both directed at making a change or making a change happen. And I think they're fluid because at some points in my life I was an activist and then I converted to an advocate. They're both equally important in my opinion, but I think an advocate works on behalf of a group. And many of you, I think, have been advocates. And I'll give you an example of a good one. And then the activist will work to spur social or political change. So both can happen at the same time, but it's really difficult to do for one person to do both. So that's why many of us kind of roll over from the advocacy to the activism or vice versa. But I'll give you one good example, and actually I have two of my former bosses here today, and I would consider them both to be extremely effective advocates. Daphne and Dr. Long, in organizations that I have worked with, have been able to move movements into change. I'll give you an example of what Dr. Long did at the Columbus Public Health, which was a great example of advocacy. She fought for almost 10 years to have an LGBTQ health advocate at the health department looking after the health of LGBTQ people, because we know that we don't share in the same good health outcomes that other communities do. So it took her 10 years of fighting, but she never gave up, finally found the money, and we were one of the first health departments in the nation to have that advocate. Julie, I think you were one of those, so thank you for your good work. And the legacy lives on. Today, they continue to have that advocate. So that's a great example of advocacy. Activism, the best example of activism, and I had a little bit of work with them in the early 90s, was ACT UP. They were extremely effective, screaming in front of the health departments, chaining themselves to Dan Rather's anchor desk. But you know what? They were also coming in through the back door and meeting with the health commissioners. So even though they were fighting out front and getting all the attention from the media, they were going in the back and meeting with people like Dr. Long and others. So they were smart, and they were just not screaming. So anyhow, that's kind of an interesting way to define yourself, whether you're an activist or an advocate.
Thank you, Jose. And I think, Karen, you want to jump in on that? No? Okay. So I think she looked like she was like, yeah. So in our debriefing, one of the things you said that I really enjoyed was that intergenerationally, most of us started out as activists and then transitioned as we got older and got more influential and got more in our careers and turned to advocacy. And sometimes activism becomes the ones. I always tell my young friends is that I'm not going to be out in the streets. I got bad feet. I'm not marching no more. But I will figure out how to make policy so you can do it. Now, I'm not one that's going to write a check. I'll sit in the back, but I'm not going to be necessarily busting the windows in no more. But at 48, yes, I'll tell my age. At 48, thank you, 48.
Yeah.
Thank you. At 48, my advocacy looks different because now I'm in different rooms and sit at different tables that I can actually influence policy and change, whereas the activism needs to happen on both sides. But as you grow and change and mature, your passion doesn't change, but your ability to make that change does. So thank you for that. Joseph, what does activism look like in younger generations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like there's a point I kind of want to make to this question with, I think, a different question that we have too, about a lot of the loss that our community experienced, right, because of the HIV pandemic and just because of hate and hate crime, right? We're already a small community. We're already a minority, right, LGBTQ folks. And then we only have, right, so many people, so many numbers, right? And when we're attacked and when we experience loss, it's hard because those of us who are left over, I think the younger folks, we are looking for mentors. We are looking for a lot of our elders, a lot of whom are not here anymore, right? So there's a bit of a gap, and that's something that I mourn. So I think younger generations are kind of, that's the context, right? That a lot of younger activists are working in and trying trying to figure out how to fill that gap of mentorship, right, in doing this work and in taking part in activism. One of the things that I'm really, really inspired by is the unapologetic use of a lot of the new tools that we have, because we do have a lot of tools that didn't exist in generations prior, like social media, right, or our ability to communicate has increased. We have more options with how to communicate, and I definitely see a lot of young activists taking advantage of that. We're very unapologetic in sharing our opinion and saying exactly what we think and exactly what we mean. So I think that's one thing that I do celebrate, and I'm sure that comes with challenges as well. There are challenges that come with the use of social media, but yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. I think one of the things you hit on, the panel said a lot of times, is that we also have to think about the impact that HIV/AIDS has had on our community and activism. One of the things I shared with the panel in our debriefing was that if it wasn't for HIV, I probably wouldn't be here, only because HIV, for many of us, forced us to become professionals. It forced us to become activists and then advocates. If it wasn't for HIV, I wouldn't have known that I had a passion for social work, that I wouldn't know how to learn about reading grants and actually hold elected officials accountable, because those were things in the early 90s and 2000s. Before we knew anything else, we knew how to go to the Congress and ask for more appropriations. We knew how to legislate and write for the Ryan White Care Act and things there. So HIV had such a devastating impact that many of our predecessors are no longer here. One of the things that Joseph alluded to, I'm 48, I'll say it again. However, in my community, I'm considered an elder. And I'm not really okay with it, but however, that's kind of sad, whereas outside of the LGBT plus community, I have my father is 67, one of my mother's sisters is 75. Those are actually the true elders, but there are very few of us, especially in the Black gay community, that are over the age of 55 and 60 who are still doing the work and still being around, because it took out a whole 2 decades of us. And so that's important to know too when we're talking about advocacy. Okay.
You said something, Joe, that I thought was interesting. When you're an activist, you're actually able to speak your mind. When you're an advocate, you have to be really careful how you position yourself. So that transition, you go in almost it's a different approach, totally different approach. You can't always say what you think when you're an advocate, because again, words matter, and there's a certain freedom to be able to do that.
Chris, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joseph.
I was just going to add, I think that freedom exists generally, like for younger folks, right? Because there are less, when you're younger and you haven't fully gotten into your career yet, you have less attachments, right? That, you got to worry about who you're offending, or you got to worry about your reputation, right? And that's one of the things that I do think a lot of young activists are taking advantage of, and it's a good thing. But we all need each other, and that's probably why the multi-generational approach to doing this change work is so important, because we can afford to take different angles and to do different things, right?
And to be fair, the 4 of us have worked together on many projects, so we don't come to the table without that experience. I did want to give a shout out. You were talking about the AIDS movement and how we grew up during it. We would have never been as successful as we were if it wasn't for women. Mm-hmm. Women stepped up when gay men couldn't because of discrimination and fear, and they led the charge. Most of my friends that died of HIV or AIDS were taken care of by these brave women, whether they were nurses, friends, neighbors. It was a really difficult time, but I just wanted to give that shout out, because I think it helped the women's movement also propel.
Thank you. Chris.
I was going to say, I'm going to beg to differ on there's a difference between activism and advocacy, because those of you who know me know I have never been afraid to speak my mind to power. It's like, I will, call it like I see it, regardless. And one of my guiding principles, I guess, is that if I am not pissing people off once in a while, I am not pushing them hard enough. And that's how you make change.
Yeah. I'm going to say something to that, because I'll be right in the middle of it, right? Pragmatic millennial, right? So when I
allegedly.
Allegedly. Apparently some people read my letters, they don't think so. But if I think about when advocacy, so we have these terms, and I know when I've been in spaces where people were like, this is kind of nearing activism, and we want to stay in the advocacy place. That also stems from them probably being uncomfortable. And so just kind of leaning into that discomfort. I'm fluid. I'm gender fluid. I'm pretty much all fluid. So like, I believe that that's on a spectrum as well, in the sense of, people's discomfort is going to range all over that spectrum. But personally, I have to define it by how strategic I'm being and literally how my body can be in those spaces. Like, my friends were in the protest in 2020, and I couldn't be a part of that because I can't run. And I can't imagine what would have happened. There were people that got injuries and they could run. And so I don't even know what that would look like, today, but I do think there's a line around, how strategic you want to be, how uncomfortable things are making you, how much change you're willing to risk, to speak up, even when it's not what maybe is wanting to be said or people don't have the courage to say.
Thank you for that, Karen. Chris?
I was just going to say, and there's acknowledging, I acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege in that way because I own my own business. I don't have to worry about losing my job. I'm out to everybody in my life, everybody. And so I don't have to worry about, somebody's going to find out that I'm a lesbian. Hello, big L. And I said, right. And so, I acknowledge that there's privilege in being able to be that out and that safe.
Thank you for that. I remember when both you and Karen were talking, I remember back in maybe 95, I was in, I came at the tail end of ACT UP, so I'm not old enough to say I was part of ACT UP, but we were at the back part of it. And we were doing something at Capitol Hill, and I remember we were in, they have these basements in at Congress where you meet before you go talk to the reps. And they said, and you know what? And then we're all going to get arrested, but don't worry about it because they're going to let us out. Excuse me. So this before itself, so I called my mom on the payphone. I said, Mom, we're going to go ahead and purposely get arrested. She said, you going to do what? She said, baby, look at yourself in the mirror, get on that Greyhound. So what I say that to say is that activism looks different for some of us in marginalized groups. Karen mentioned being uncomfortable. I often tell people, I'm used to being uncomfortable. I thrive on it. I'm always the only black in the room. I'm always the only black gay in the room. I'm always the one with the biggest hair in the room. So I'm used to being uncomfortable in those situations because uncomfortable breeds change. And oftentimes we want to be so stuck in our status quo, we scream about change, but oftentimes we only want change until that comfort level for us dissipates, or that's the word, disappears. And so we have to think about what makes us uncomfortable in these spaces that we're not used to. Think about those of us who've been in these spaces as advocates, as the first, as activisms, and we've been in these comfortable spaces. And so leading that to Karen. What is the impact of intersectionality and race culture as it relates to advocacy and activism in Columbus, Ohio? I'll let you start off with that one.
Intersectionality, I'll give a brief definition just in case we don't know what we're talking about. Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 coined the term intersectionality. There was a case where a black woman was being discriminated against, and she felt like they said it's not racism and it's not sexism. And so then she coined that term so she could adequately define, and it's a measure of cumulative impact of the weight of various identities and their intersections or where they intersect. And where they intersect is there's most pain points. It can be challenging at times as someone who has multiple intersections. It's like, okay, is this because I'm black? Is this because I'm queer? Is this because I'm disabled? Like whatever that is, like, what is this about? And so there's a emotional tax. You'll hear about that as well. There's an emotional tax or a cumulative impact that comes with it. So generally the more marginalized, and I try not to get caught up in like the oppression Olympics, but generally the most marginalized over multiple identities experience the most discrimination, prejudice, and up to violence. And so the importance of that, as you can see, when we're talking about power and influence, you've heard that multiple times around influence, collective power. We talk about that a lot. Like, we are collectively much more powerful than one of us walking into a situation alone. And so a lot of times you have, when you look at, even within the movement, right? So we're talking about the HIV, the black gay male experience was completely different than the white gay man experience. Access to medicine, access to care, all of those things were different because of different levels of marginalization around race, gender, and sexuality. And so normally we can't get much past those. There's lots of diversity dimensions actually, but we can't normally get past those. And so that's just to say that lived experience for someone who has multiple identities is gonna experience different things. And in Columbus, Ohio, what I can say is, and a national reference is Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone. And she talks about neighborhoods. Like Columbus is still pretty segregated. I don't know how, I know Michael Wilkos is in here. Go see one of his presentations for sure. He's with United Way, but it's still pretty segregated. And when you think about that, and you think about the demographics that have more access, all the way to climate control where you have more trees, you know, like, and then temperatures are different, and then there's more violence in neighborhoods where there's higher temperature. All of that is connected. And when you look at that in Columbus, I think the biggest thing to note is that we're still really segregated, so there's still a lot of racial impacts and racial experiences that are completely different from other LGBTQ experiences. And then when you combine them, because there are queer people of color, when you combine those things and then even look at sexuality, there's, within the community, there's conversations around trans folks, like everybody, you would think everybody would be like, hey, everybody's here. It's not like that. It's not like that. So even within our own community, you know, it's one thing to try and say something to the world. When we have our whole community here, there's intersections within us that we don't all understand. We can acknowledge and we can learn about it and we can connect around it, but there are different lived experiences based on different other intersections. And I think it's really important to note that as much as we intentionally connect, you know, Chris started the LGBTQ plus leadership roundtable, and that's one of the places where you'll see most of the LGBT, or you and other people, you know. So, you're like,
Rhonda
that was,
Rivera started.
Oh, Rhonda Rivera, yes. I'm sorry, you took over 20, was it 27? Okay, all right, years ago.
Too long.
To Ronald Rivera. So like when you have the LGBTQ plus roundtable and we're intentionally there and you have up to 50 people that are LGBTQ plus folks in leadership positions, looking at those opportunities, it's really a lot of work and intention to do that, but that's not just happening organically because of the segregated state of Columbus.
Thank you. Chris, to piggyback off of Karen's discussion, what's the importance of history and intergenerational collaboration? So you self-proclaimed yourself at the top.
Well, maybe
but I know intersectionality and even language has changed since when you and even Jose have started to work in activism and advocacy to now. What is the importance of us and those of us who are here on that front lines to know that history of who came before us?
I think there are two ways to look at that. I mean, obviously, knowing your history and understanding some of the lessons that we learned and learning from our mistakes can help younger activists kind of have a leg up, right? But on the other hand, there's a tendency, especially I think in the LGBT community, I think it's true across the board, to kind of, I sometimes feel like senior citizens become invisible. I guess I have, you know, I've identified as a middle-aged lesbian for so long that, but I'm not. I'm a senior citizen now. And I think there's some dismissiveness that happens naturally. It's just a generational kind of gap. But you have to actively learn to listen to each other. I mean, just because young people want to do it differently than we did it 50 years ago doesn't mean they're wrong. You know, so there's not that, I told you that wouldn't work kind of thing. And on the other hand, I think young people sometimes like, you know, it's part of growing up and separating from your birth family and your parents, and it's like, oh, old people, you know, you're living in the past. And so the most important thing is conversation. To talk to, not at, but to talk with each other intergenerationally, and, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. I ask young people, like, I don't understand this, explain this to me. Because, you know, I don't want to stop learning just because I'm older. And I don't want to stop teaching either, because I'm also a teacher by nature. And so conversation, I think, is the key. You have to just keep asking questions and answering questions and having dialogue. Yep.
And Joseph, I know you talked a little bit more earlier about lack of mentorship that's in the community as it relates to activism and advocacy. How do we find a tether that connects us all outside of our trauma?
Yeah, that, oof.
I didn't make that question up. Joseph did. I just took ownership of it. It was a deep. I saw you said, "Ooh, yeah, good one." That's all Joseph. I'll give him credit for it.
Thank you. I think that's an important question because I think one of the things I think about with the LGBTQ community that's a little bit different from other marginalized communities is that we're not all kind of inherently connected to one another. So like when I think of, for example, like the Puerto Rican community I grew up in, you know, all of us being connected by ethnicity, culture, shared history, you know, those are sort of value-wise like neutral things, right? And no matter what happens in the world, we're connected. If one of us experiences discrimination, all of us, you know, are come to bat, right, for that family member, for that person. But with the LGBTQ community, we're all like unrelated to each other, right? Like I'm thinking about how when I even realized I was gay, right, and I was alone, right? I'm the only. This is something my parents didn't share with me, my sister, the people that were immediately around me. I think there were other people in the church, but I didn't know that. So I'm thinking, right, like I'm alone in the church. That's a different kind of experience of marginalization than other groups, right, where there's a little bit more of a like community happens like naturally, right, with certain other groups. So with that, I do think we need to be really intentional in thinking about how we form community. What are the things that tether us as a community? And I do have a concern if those things are like trauma bonding. Right. That's something that I'm almost just sort of foreseeing. One of the questions I ask myself is like, let's do this thought experiment and say that like tomorrow we have liberation. Yay, we did it, right? Like tomorrow all the issues impacting LGBTQ people, we fixed it. I have to stop and think, well, wait, like what does that world look like, right? Like are we basically in being a community right now, are we living that out, you know? Like are we actually bringing that into fruition, which in my own personal kind of like spiritual beliefs, I don't believe a thing can really be manifested in the world unless there is some, you know, you are a consciousness that imagines it, right? You have to like imagine it beforehand. So I think there are values, like neutral, just good values that as a community we can tether. I think that LGBTQ people represent something that's really important in the world and maybe have an offering for the rest of the world by the fact that we look inward and we get to know ourselves so intimately. Mm-hmm. That's something that is valuable for everyone to do, not just LGBTQ people. And maybe form, you know, maybe that's the thing, right, that we can form to tether us.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes, you sure can.
So I think something that I have learned to realize through the work that I've done professionally is that we are children of trauma. So to one extent or another, the homes in which we grew up and the experiences that we had were not what others have had. So I think inherently we are a bit complex. I think what we had during HIV was we had unity. We came together and we had one goal in mind, and that was really unifying. But I will tell you, I somewhat grieve for the unity that we had then. I never wish for that moment back, but I could walk to the coffee table and find community. How many of you here know what the coffee table was? Great. And I could talk to Julie because she was schlepping coffee. But it was really a sense of community that I mourn for today because I don't have a lot of community. I see my friends here and there. We go out to dinner, but there's really no coming together. And I mourn for that. I really wish we had more of that.
Me too. The funny story on the side is when we were talking about the coffee table, I shared with them that that's where me and my friends came out because we were 18, 19, just out of high school, and we couldn't go to like the clubs like the Eagles and things. And I didn't realize that was Julia doing the coffee because we would be there Friday nights at 8 o'clock to 2 in the morning turning it. Like just sitting there, didn't drink their liquor coffee, but we're just sitting out there the whole time. And I didn't realize it until he said that. And I called my best friend. He said, her name was Julia. I did not know that was Julia. I forget it. And that's about, what, 30 years ago. Thank you, Jose.
No, it was just last week.
Yeah, last week, I'm sorry, yeah.
Can I say something real quick? So looking at like, around the trauma bond, the connections, so like at times it can be skewed where you can see those connections, but I think the loud thing that's clear, and I want to tie this in with what's happening now, the loud thing that's really clear is like we need to heal, right? So if you have trauma, then you can heal. And, abuse, substance, like all those things, it's like we need to still heal. Like there's an injury, there's impact, and then there's healing. And when you think about the opportunity to heal, how do you heal? Well, you have resources, you have time, you have space, you have support, you have community. When you look at those things aren't available as much to us right now in one way or another because maybe there's not resources. If we're constantly still having to fight against legislation that demeans us or dehumanizes us, then we don't have time and space and all of that to still heal. And so the goal would be to get it to a space where you're like, okay, so liberation exists. The goal will be to get it to a space where there's space and time to heal, and then you can see some of that thriving in that imagination. You can't dream if you can't rest. Right? So when you're like thinking about all of those things, that's why me and Aaron started the Ohio Rest Collective, is because our nervous systems are so dysregulated, but there's no time and space because we're still fighting against things that we were fighting against and supposedly felt like we had some security in 30 years ago. So, I mean, I think those all play into the idea around trauma bonding. I don't think we'll have to worry about it in any of our lifetimes if we'll be over that.
Thank you, Karen.
Go ahead. Yeah, and to me, what that brings to mind is, I think, a lack of understanding about the politics of oppression. Because when you are marginalized, for whatever reason or reasons, the dominant culture, the dominant paradigm is saying to you, you can't come in. And so when we come together, and this, Jose, I thought about this when you were talking about community. When we were making community in those days, we were marginalized in lots of different ways, and we came together, which is separation. We separated from that dominant culture to learn from each other, to learn about ourselves, to empower each other, to rest, to do all of those things. And segregation is when the dominant culture says you can't come in. And so I think a lot of times what happens is we don't get those clear in our brain. Are we separating to be together, to empower, to learn, or are we keeping somebody out? Right. And I think that there's a lack of the understanding of that depth, and that's a big piece of that trauma. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Could I respond to just Karen got me on a train of thought with the rest thing, because I think that's really important, and it's taking me back to the question earlier about young activists and how they're doing it today. And that's one thing I do celebrate about younger generations, not just with LGBTQ activism, but it does seem like the inclusion of like rest is a part of the resistance. And I think it's in the mindset of a lot of younger activists that me taking care of myself is an act of resistance, right? Like me, that is a form of activism, which I do think is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe different than former generations, right? A different approach. And it makes me think of all of what's going on. We see like everyone's talking about the quiet quitting, right, in the workforce, and everyone's talking about, these conversations. And we might not be inclined to connect those automatically to LGBTQ liberation, but they are, and that speaks to the intersectionality, not just of identities, but of issues, right? Issues are all, correlated, right? Yeah.
Well, that was a good hot one. Okay. So reading from my script here, we're going to move to questions from a live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have any questions, please make your way to the microphone now. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat before we take audience questions. But I have one final question for our panelists. If you were to leave a challenge or a charge to the audience in person or online today, what would it be?
Oh, I'm happy to go first. I would encourage you all we can all be advocates. Our movement would not have taken place if it wasn't for advocacy and if it wasn't for allies. I look at so many allies here in this room, and you can have as much as an impact as I can. But we need allyship. It's always worked, and it will continue to work. So I would encourage you to do that. And then, of course, voting. Voting is the ultimate change. Vote. If you vote for somebody that hates me or that puts a law in place that harms me or my family, you are not being good to me. So I am disconnecting from a lot of my friends that vote for people that do not have my best interests at heart. It might sound harsh, but we need to follow through with what we need to do to save ourselves. So that's
Thank you
mine.
for that. Chris?
I think the challenge is to do something. And that's going to vary depending on you and your life and your circumstances. But from a social movement perspective, we need to fight on every front. We need the checkbook activists who maybe are able to write large checks to support the work of various groups and organizations. We need volunteers. We need the radical fringe. I mean, ACT UP made a huge difference. Queer Nation made a huge difference. The Lesbian Avengers made a huge difference. So, we can't say, oh, I don't, those are those freaky people. We don't want them. We have to fight on every front, and we have to acknowledge that we may not all be comfortable in all of those places, but there's a place for everybody to do something in this movement, because together we can get it done.
Thank you, Chris.
That's true.
Karen and Joseph?
Yeah, I'll use a quote and then I'll flip it. So the quote is Audre Lorde, and my liberation is tied up in yours, right? Or how can I, move on? My siblings tied up in theirs. And the way I'll use that for the individual is going to be everything's an inside job. So the first thing I'm always telling anybody to do, I'm going to tell you two things. The first thing for anybody to do is take care of themselves. You got to look at yourselves. You got to look at your biases. You got to look at your blind spots. You got to look at the resources and access and level of privilege that you have. And then not to feel guilt or shame around it, you need to leverage it in the ways that you can to support the collective good. And then on the other end, find community. And so if I'm healing, taking care of myself, and then you're healing, you take care of yourself, and then we find each other in that healthy living cycle, and we're building community. And if no one has it built the way you think it should go, like your vision, build it. Build it yourself. Yep. And a lot of people have a lot of resentment around labor, and I understand all of that in the movement of rest and learning things, but I experience, and I do believe that this is at a heightened level, I get to experience the level of community. My community is like United Colors of Benetton, and it is a gorgeous view of dynamic diversity in people, and I get to have those kind of experiences more because I create them. Because now I put myself in a position to be able to do that. I wasn't always able to, rent a venue or create a space. That's not always going to happen. But as an artist, I can create those spaces as just sitting on the porch and talking. Like, those are things that you can do to build, and you have to be a big intentional player in that, especially if there's nothing that looks like what you need.
Thank you, Karen. Joseph?
For me, I would think back to the way that I have historically thought about activism and advocacy, the distinction, and I, in the past, have just sort of simplified it as what do I say and what do I do. That's usually how I usually think of advocacy, as what I'm saying and believe, right, in the world, and the stance that I have, and then what am I doing about it. So I think my challenge would just be for each of us as individuals to maybe ask ourselves that question of what am I on this issue, right, and maybe on any issue. What am I saying about it, and then what am I doing, and then more importantly, do they align? Do my actions align with what I say or what I say that I believe and represent?
Thank you, Joseph. It is CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. Lainey Cuthbert with CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For those of you with us in person, Please join Lainey at the microphone. Out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get to as many as possible. Please also keep in mind the questions do end with a question mark. Do I need to repeat that? Lainey, what is your first question? Question mark.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you on the panel. I'm going to kind of go actually against the grain of what you just said because this is an important a message we received online. Michael Kokonis wanted to send a shout out to Chris. At every important organization event, an initiative for lesbians and beyond, Chris and Gloria deserve every accolade the wide community can bestow. If you identify in this community or as an accomplice, or you live in the Central Ohio area or statewide, you owe some thanks and gratitude to the modeling, lifting, creating, guarding, leading, inspiring that you have done for so many. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Michael.
And a follow-up question to that is from Isaac Bean. What advice do you have for queer youth who are just starting to get involved in advocacy that you wished that you had known from the start?
Who wants to, Joseph?
You start.
First, I would always say get connected with Kaleidoscope Youth Center. I had the honor of working there for 3 years, and they are the only one in the state that's statewide. It's been around a while. So first, and then second, download Discord apparently. So that's their app, and there's lots of groups in there that are doing advocacy. A lot of times the youth, we had, a youth advisory council, they came to us and said, we're doing this, can we do it on your property? And we'd be like, we're nonpartisan, but you can go right out here, right? So we had to give them different instructions, but there's a lot of organizing that's happening. But, their GSA within their schools or their Kaleidoscope are really helpful. It is a frightening place for youth right now with all the legislation that's coming against them. And their experience, so try to find some community. But most of all, I think they're all right. Like that's what I gather. But those are some resources that they can use.
I think in addition to that, if I was thinking about my 19-year-old self, what's that, 39 years ago? I would say pace yourself. Understand that the cause right now is going to change next week, and figuring out, making sure that you're aligning yourself with the right people. Because sometimes people take other people's pain and make it their own cause for that moment, for a hashtag, especially now, for a hashtag or for a moment, and then they go on to something else that contradicts what they just was doing last week. So make sure you're investigating what it is that you're actually passionate about, and that that's truly for you and the people around you are committed to the same cause.
And I would add to that, find safety. Whatever safety looks like for you, whether that's physical safety, spiritual safety, psychic safety, find safety. And if you can't find it, get help finding it, because that is what nurtures you and keeps you alive, safety.
I think one of the biggest enemies to this work is like burnout, and we get so exhausted. And I think I'm still kind of learning in this work that is something that is a strategy employed by people that are opposed to equality. They try to wear us out, right? Like that's part of the intention. Karen, you spoke to, do we have the capacity to rest and imagine right now, right? Because we're under attack all the time. And I think I'm in the middle right now of kind of expanding my consciousness to realize that, oh, they're doing that on purpose, right? That's why I'm so tired. That's why I'm so exhausted. So to be honest, I think I kind of would just piggyback off of what Ron said about pacing, and also not carrying the full burden on your own individual shoulders, right? Of changing things. Like this is a monster that we're attacking here, and it's going to take time. And it's a part of white supremacy culture, right? To always have this sense of urgency and to feel like, oh, we gotta get it done right now. We can pace ourselves, and allowing ourselves, I think, giving ourselves permission to do that is really important, especially from the get-go, right? From when you start this work.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yep, my answer would be to just find your passion. I mean, there's many, many causes that you can lead with. Right now, I think one of the biggest crises we have in our community is the really two things. Transphobia is alive and well. And when you think of that the life expectancy of a black trans woman is 35 years old, that should make you angry. So finding that space what you're passionate about and going for it. The other one that's clearly is our state house. I mean, we are under attack. Young people are under attack. That's why I mentioned before to vote. We need more representation. Why aren't we at the State House working there? We need to have more people working at the State House, and we don't. So anyhow.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm an economist. I own Regionomics. And I guess I'm giving you a leading question. Things for us now are so much better, immeasurably better than they were, say, in the 1980s and 1990s. And we have run into comments, things are great, I'm doing well, everything's fine. How do you answer something like that and push for advocacy?
Do you mean the response to the question was, so like if somebody was saying that people are saying that it's fine?
Yeah, my husband and I have run into a number of folks who've said, oh, we're doing well.
Sure.
Don't bother us.
So the complacency then is I think that's actually a really, really good question. And I think that's one of the reasons why I do encourage us to try and create the space to be able to imagine what actual liberation looks like. Because speaking to the burnout, you know, we get so burnt out and we experience so much trauma that when we get to a place where we're just okay, I kind of don't blame, you know, us for feeling complacent and getting to a place like, look, I'm tired, I'm okay, right? I don't want to do this work anymore. That's human and that's understandable. I think what keeps us engaged is if it really matters to us to really build community and have a healthful community. Because what is probably the case is some of us who are okay, there are our siblings, especially, you know, people that are experiencing highest marginalization, right, with intersectionality, my black trans sisters, right, out on the streets, or, you know, if I care enough, then I'm not going to be content, right? That maybe I'm okay, right? So I think that's sort of the piece that I guess it's a challenge to all of us, is to evaluate what our privileges are, and are we really okay with just individually getting to a place where we're okay, or you know, do we really want to get to that place where our community as a whole is actually safe and well?
Thank you, Joe. I think my answer would be kind of similar to yours, is that I don't have the privilege just to say I'm okay, let's keep it where it's at. Because I'm not okay unless all of us are okay. My trauma doesn't allow me to be okay when I see my brothers and sisters that are dying, overdosing, things like that. So this part may be okay, but there's so much over here that we're experiencing now that's not okay, that we still have much work to do. So if we rest our laurels on just I'm okay, then our community, the work that we're doing, is going to falter. We can be okay and be complacent, but there's so much to do that I don't have time to rest and be just okay. Because I don't know what that feels like because of where I come from, because of what I've been through, and because of what people are still going through. So I don't have that luxury to do that. And I implore anybody who feels that way to look to your left and your right and come out of your bubble and see if everybody else is okay.
Right. And
I'm here all day.
You know, for me, it is understanding privilege in a much more complex way. Because there's not just one kind of privilege. I like to view privilege as a line down the middle of the street, and sometimes you're on one side of the street, and sometimes you're on the other. I am white. I have privilege. I am a woman. I do not have privilege. I have a college education. I have privilege. I own my own house. I have privilege. I'm fat. I don't have privilege. I am disabled. I do not have privilege. So we cross back and forth across that privilege line. No one that I know is completely on one side of the street ever. And we get stuck on the privileged side of the street. And it's really our role to reach across that center line, literally, and use our privilege to bring people to the other side of the street.
So, like, in response to that question, I'm just thinking about, like, you know, everything to both of whatever they said. I think looking at when you have, like, younger generations or when you're thinking about these things, hold on, let me get my thought, because it was a good one. So if it's a person or a situation, so if it's a person or a situation, then if that person is saying those things or they're fine, leave me alone, I'm probably going to leave them alone, to be honest, because I want to try and spend as much time as possible moving forward with the people that are doing. That's like a canvassing mindset, right? So if I'm getting to a door, they're saying no, I'm moving right along because I'm going to talk to the people I'm going to rock with the people that want to rock with me. So, like, looking into that and what that means for the community, yes, there is a thought about, like, when your work ends or how you're supposed to do this work and what that means. But I think my focus stays on the people that are with me, and then those numbers just keep getting bigger, and the energy just keeps getting bigger, and then we can do what we need to do and hopefully delegate, right, and still take care of it. But it's a hard thing, and I think I learned this in 2016 on the first time there was that presidential election. If people weren't voting for people, like you were talking about, like, cutting some people off, that has to happen sometimes, but that's for me. That's around my safety. That's around what I need and what I need to feel safe, what I need to have room to rest, and I think that's really the challenge. That's really the challenge is, when do I push this a little bit further on someone? But really, we just want to obligate them to do whatever we want to do. So I think getting really intentional about those conversations, and also, like, stay where the energy is. Stay where the people that want to do this work are.
Thank you, Karen. So I wish we had more time, but as I told you at the beginning, it's a very verbose and passionate panel, and we're a little bit over time. But we'll turn it back over to Doug Buchanan for concluding remarks. Doug, thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
And sorry.
All right, I hope you all found today's forum as inspiring as I did. Let's once again thank the Lynn Greer Legacy and Civic Engagement Fund and Lynn herself. Thank you. We also want to thank today's forum sponsors, Battelle and Lighthouse Behavioral Health Solutions, and to our forum partner, Stonewall Columbus. Thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. We can have a hand once more for a bunch of sponsors. Please make plans to join us next Wednesday for What Makes Art Art with Nanette Macy-Junes, Tom Katzenmeyer, and artist Brian Moss. A very special appreciation to today's speakers, Chris Cozad, Karen Hewitt, Jose Rodriguez, Joseph Soza, and our host, Ronald Murray. Thank you all once again. And thank you all for joining us. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Have a wonderful day.